There is a kind of breakdown that does not announce itself. No warning, no sudden crash. It happens quietly, like water slowly getting into the walls of a house. At first, nothing looks wrong. Life still looks normal from the outside. They still laugh, still talk, still scroll, still pretend everything is fine. But inside, something is changing, something is weakening, and they don't even notice it, because they are too focused on acting like they are okay. That is how the loss of someone real begins to work. Not loud, not dramatic, just slow pressure on the inside. You leaving didn't just create distance, it started something deeper in them, a shift they cannot explain. And here is the part they never admit. It is not only about missing you, it is about what your absence reveals in them. Stay with this for a moment, because this is where it gets real. When someone like you is gone, it does not just feel like emptiness. It feels like a reflection they cannot escape. Suddenly they are forced to see parts of themselves they never had to look at before. The version of them that existed around you is gone too. The way they spoke, the way they acted, the way they felt understood in small moments, all of that disappears. And what remains is not comfort, it is silence. And in that silence, thoughts start to rise, things they avoided, feelings they pushed down, memories they never fully processed. It is not just sadness about losing you, it is confusion about losing the version of themselves that only existed with you. That is the part that hits hardest, because now they are not only missing a person, they are missing a feeling of being seen in a way they cannot recreate easily. And the silence changes everything. No more messages, no more reactions, no more familiar presence. At first, they try to act normal. They tell themselves it is fine. They stay busy. They distract themselves. They go out. They scroll. They pretend they are moving on. But in quiet moments, something shifts. Late at night, when the world slows down, the mind starts speaking louder, not in dramatic breakdowns, but in small, uncomfortable thoughts. Why does everything feel different? Why does nothing feel as light as before? Why does even normal life feel slightly off? And here is something most people don't notice. The absence of a specific person does not just remove them. It changes the emotional rhythm of everyday life. Even simple things feel unfamiliar. Even peace feels different. And yes, this is the part they never prepared for. But here's the thing. The mind does not stay quiet for long. When distraction fades, awareness returns. And what returns is not always comfortable. It starts with overthinking small moments, replaying conversations, remembering expressions, noticing things they ignored before. Then it becomes deeper. Questions start forming. Not loud questions, quiet ones. The kind that appear when everything else is silent. The kind that do not let them rest fully, and slowly a battle begins inside them. One part wants to move on quickly. The other part keeps pulling them back into memory. It is not about you controlling their thoughts. It is about their own mind trying to understand what changed inside them after you left. And this internal conflict does not stop easily. It repeats in cycles, especially in moments of stillness. And here is where it becomes even more intense. The more they try to avoid it, the stronger it feels. Staying busy becomes a strategy. Constant activity, constant noise, anything to avoid sitting alone with their thoughts, because silence is no longer empty. It feels loaded, heavy, like something waiting to be noticed. So they fill their days with anything that keeps them moving, plans they don't care about, conversations that feel shallow, distractions that last only a few hours. But no matter how much they run, the mind always catches up eventually. And when it does not accuse, it questions, softly, repeatedly, almost calmly. And that calmness is what makes it impossible to ignore, because it does not attack. It simply asks things they cannot easily answer anymore. Quiet, heavy, and impossible questions. The kind that do not shout but still echo everywhere. Questions like, who are you when no one is watching and truly understanding you? Or, was the version of you with them real? Or just the closest you ever came to who you wanted to be? And then the harder one, what were you so afraid of, that you chose loss over honesty. These thoughts do not come all at once. They arrive slowly, in the background of normal life, while they talk, while they smile, while they try to act like they moved on. But inside, something keeps repeating, something unfinished, something unresolved, and stay with this for a moment, because this is where it gets uncomfortable. Because these questions do not answer themselves, not quickly, not easily, and not without a level of honesty most people avoid their whole lives. So instead they sit there in the background of everything. In conversations that feel slightly off, in new meetings that don't fully engage them, in moments where they are physically present but mentally drifting somewhere else, somewhere that still feels connected to you, somewhere that still carries the memory of how things used to feel. And what they never admit is this: they stop fully trusting their own judgment. That is the shift nobody sees coming, not just missing a person, but doubting their own ability to choose what is right for them. Because grief at this level is not simple sadness. It does something deeper. It shakes confidence in their own instincts. If they lost someone real, or let someone real go, then what does that say about their decisions? What does that say about their understanding of love, timing, and value? And this doubt does not stay in one area. It spreads quietly into friendships, into work, into how they see themselves. Suddenly, even simple choices feel less certain, and the mind starts replaying everything, trying to find where things went wrong, trying to locate the exact moment they should have acted differently. And yes, this is the part they rarely admit out loud, but feel all the time. And because facing that discomfort is difficult, they try to escape it. Not always through people, not always directly, but through replacement, something easier, something faster, something that fills time without demanding emotional truth. Constant distraction, constant noise, staying busy just to avoid stillness, because stillness is where the real thoughts return. So they keep moving. New habits, new attention, new temporary escapes, but none of it fully works. It only delays what is already there. And here is the dangerous part. Even they know it, deep down. They know the busyness is covering something. They know the new distractions are not healing anything, but they keep going anyway, because silence feels heavier than action. And yes, this is where things quietly start to shift again. There are even small moments they cannot control, like waking up and feeling okay for a few seconds, no pressure, no thoughts, just a brief calm before awareness fully returns. And then it hits. Memory, awareness, and emotion, all coming back at once, and suddenly the day begins under weight again. That contrast becomes familiar, a few seconds of peace, followed by everything else. And over time, they start recognizing patterns in themselves, sudden mood changes, emotional distance, moments of confusion they cannot explain. Not because something new is happening, but because something unresolved is still active inside them. And here is the part that really matters. Because what they lost was not just a person. It was also a version of themselves that only existed in that connection. The way they behaved, the way they opened up, the way they allowed themselves to feel seen without fully realizing it. That version does not disappear neatly. It stays in memory. And now, without that presence, they feel slightly unanchored, like something familiar is missing but hard to name. So they try to adjust. They try to replace the feeling. They try to act normal. But normal feels different now. And even when life continues, something inside keeps reflecting back the same truth in quiet moments. And if you're still here listening, you already know this isn't just about moving on. They didn't let you slip away because they didn't want you. It was because wanting something real, something that asked them to be real too, was the most uncomfortable thing they had ever faced. You were not frightening in a harmful way. You were frightening in the way truth feels when it finally arrives. Not loud, not aggressive, just undeniable. And for someone built on avoidance and carefully managed emotions, truth feels like pressure, like exposure, like something they cannot control anymore. And here's the part they never say out loud. It wasn't you they feared. It was what your presence would require them to become. Stay with this for a second, because this is where it shifts. Because real connection does not just feel soft and easy. It reflects back everything. The good, the unhealed, the hidden, the unfinished parts. And that reflection is not always comfortable. It shows where someone is still growing, where they are still avoiding, where they are still carrying things they promised themselves they would deal with later. And when you were there, that reflection was constant, not harsh, just honest. And honesty for someone not ready for it feels heavier than distance. So instead of facing it, they chose space. They chose silence. They chose what felt safer in the moment, even if it cost them something deeper in the long run. But here is where it becomes dangerous in a different way. Because stepping away from truth does not remove it. It just changes where it shows up. They may have thought distance would bring relief, that without you, the discomfort would fade. But the mind does not work like that. The inner world does not need your physical presence to continue reflecting. The thoughts remain, the patterns remain. And suddenly the mirror they tried to avoid is no longer external, it is everywhere. In quiet moments, in random memories, in small triggers they cannot fully explain. A song, a phrase, a familiar silence. And each one pulls something up they thought they had moved past. And if you're paying attention, this is where it starts getting real again. Because the avoidance doesn't hold forever. At first they stay busy, they fill time, they keep moving, they surround themselves with noise, people, distraction, anything that keeps them from sitting still too long. But stillness always returns, and when it does, the thoughts come back sharper, not dramatic, just persistent. Questions they cannot fully answer, feelings they cannot fully silence, moments where they stop mid-thought and lose track of what they were even saying, because something deeper just surfaced for a second. Not distraction, recognition. And what they never admit is that these interruptions are not random, they are reminders, quiet ones. And slowly, something else begins to show up. Exhaustion. Not just physical tiredness, but a deeper kind. The kind that comes from constantly managing how you feel, instead of actually feeling it. The kind that builds when someone spends years trying to stay in control of themselves emotionally. On the outside, they may still look functional. Smiling, working, talking, moving forward. But inside, there is a constant effort happening just to keep everything contained. And over time, that effort becomes heavier than the emotions themselves. Because living in control of yourself is not the same as living in alignment with yourself. And this is where the strain starts to show. Quietly, consistently, in ways they cannot fully explain. And here is the part that cuts deepest. It is not just that they miss you. It is that they slowly realize what they were actually in contact with when you were there. A version of themselves that felt more open, more present, more real, even if imperfect. That version does not disappear cleanly. It lingers in memory, in feeling, in comparison. And now everything else feels slightly different, slightly less connected. Not because life is empty, but because something meaningful once existed in it and shifted their internal baseline. And once you've felt that level of emotional clarity, everything after it feels measured against it, even when they try not to. And if you're still here listening, you already understand this is not just about missing someone anymore. They didn't lose you because of fate, or timing, or some invisible force working against them. There was no external script written in the stars. They lost you because they were not ready to become the version of themselves that keeping you would have required. And now something else is happening. Quietly, slowly, not in one collapse, but in small internal shifts that most people never notice until it is already deep. A kind of fading from the inside, not losing status, not losing ability, not losing personality on the surface, but losing presence, losing that feeling of being fully inside their own life. And here's where it starts to feel real, because what they never admit is that they can sense it. That subtle change, the feeling of being slightly disconnected from themselves, like they are watching their own life instead of living it. On the outside, everything can still look fine, work continues, conversations happen, days pass, but something underneath is no longer aligned, a kind of emotional distance from their own experience. And this is what makes it harder, because it is not dramatic, it is not obvious, it is quiet erosion, the kind that happens when someone keeps choosing safety over honesty, comfort over truth, and avoidance over presence. And here is the part they rarely understand in the moment. They may still look successful, still social, still capable, still fine in every visible way, but internally, something starts to thin out. Not skill, not intelligence, but aliveness, the part of them that reacts fully to life, the part that feels deeply connected to meaning instead of just motion. And what they never say out loud is that they remember what it felt like when that connection was stronger, when life felt more direct, more real, and that memory does not disappear. It lingers quietly. It compares everything without asking permission. And yes, this is where the shift becomes undeniable, because you were not just a person in their life. You were part of a version of them that felt more open, more honest, more emotionally awake, not perfect, not constant, but real in a way they cannot easily recreate now. And now that version feels distant, not gone in memory, but gone in access. And so they try to fill the space, with activity, with people, with distraction, with anything that keeps them from feeling the gap too clearly. But nothing truly replaces it. It only covers it for a while, and the longer it continues, the more they realize something is missing that cannot be easily substituted. And this is where the internal pressure begins to build, because living in constant performance is not sustainable. Acting okay, staying busy, managing emotions instead of feeling them, it all takes energy, more than most people realize. And over time, that energy does not replenish in the same way. It starts to feel like running on something artificial, functional, but not alive. And slowly, exhaustion appears. Not just physical tiredness, but a deeper kind, the kind that comes from being slightly out of alignment with yourself for too long. And here's the thing, they feel it even if they cannot explain it. Because beneath all of it, there is still a part of them that remembers clarity, that remembers connection, that remembers what it felt like to be fully seen without needing to perform. That part does not disappear. It just becomes quieter under everything else. But it is still there, waiting, not for rescue, not for return, but for honesty. For the moment they stop avoiding what they already know, and that is where everything slows down internally. Because eventually every distraction loses intensity, every substitute loses impact. And what remains is the question they have been circling all along. Who am I when I stop running from myself? They didn't lose you because of fate, timing, or some outside force they could blame to feel better about it. There was no cosmic mistake, no wrong moment in the universe. They lost you because they were not ready to become the version of themselves that keeping you would have demanded. And now something quieter, heavier, is happening inside them. Not a breakdown in one moment, but a slow internal fading, a shift that does not announce itself. No dramatic collapse, just small emotional erosion over time. A person still functioning, still talking, still laughing in the right places, but something essential is no longer fully present inside them. And if you look closely, this is where it starts to matter. Because what they never openly admit is that they can feel it, that slight disconnect from themselves, like they are inside their life but not fully inside their own body while living it. On the surface, everything continues normally. Work still gets done, conversations still happen, days still pass in a straight line. But underneath, something is no longer aligned. Something feels slightly off-center, and this is the part nobody sees from the outside. It is not dramatic, it is not visible, it is a quiet drifting away from emotional truth, the result of choosing comfort over honesty too many times, choosing avoidance over presence too many times, choosing getting through the day instead of actually living it. Stay with this, because it gets deeper, And here is what makes it even more complicated. From the outside, nothing looks lost. They still appear capable, still social, still functioning at a level that makes people assume everything is fine. But internally, something important begins to thin out. Not intelligence, not personality. Something deeper than that. Aliveness. The feeling of being fully connected to what you are experiencing instead of just passing through it. And once that connection starts weakening, life starts to feel less immediate, less real. And what they never say out loud is that they remember when that feeling was stronger, when things felt clearer, when emotions were sharper but more honest. And that memory doesn't fade. It quietly compares everything that comes after it. And this is where the contrast begins to hurt. Because you were not just a person in their life. You were part of a version of them that felt more open, more emotionally awake, more present in ways they cannot easily recreate anymore. Not perfect, not stable all the time, but real in a way that stripped away performance. And now that version of them feels harder to access. Not gone completely, but distant, like something they can remember, but not fully return to. So they try to fill the space. They stay busy. They distract themselves. They surround themselves with noise, people, movement, anything that keeps them from sitting too long with what is missing. But none of it fully replaces what was there. It only delays the recognition of the gap, and slowly that gap becomes harder to ignore. And this is where something inside them starts to strain. Because living in constant performance is not neutral. It costs something. Holding yourself together emotionally, without actually processing what you feel, takes energy every single day. At first it is manageable. At first it feels like control. But over time, it turns into fatigue that is harder to explain. Not just tiredness, but a deeper exhaustion. The kind that comes from being slightly out of alignment with yourself for too long. Smiling when you are not fully present. Saying you are fine when something inside is not fine. Moving forward without fully being inside the movement. And yes, they feel it, even if they cannot fully describe it. Because underneath everything, there is still a part of them that remembers clarity. That remembers what it felt like to be fully seen without needing to perform. That remembers emotional honesty before everything became filtered through avoidance and control. That part does not disappear. It gets quieter, but it stays. And it waits, not for you, not for a return, but for honesty. For the moment the internal noise becomes too heavy to maintain. For the moment distraction stops being enough. And eventually every distraction loses its impact. Every substitute loses its meaning. And what is left is a question that refuses to leave them alone anymore. Who am I when I stop running from myself? They didn't lose you because of fate, bad timing, or some outside force that made it unavoidable. There was no invisible plan working against them. They lost you because they were not yet ready to become the version of themselves that keeping you would have required. And now something slower, deeper, and harder to explain is happening inside them. Not a single collapse. Not a dramatic ending, but a quiet internal thinning, a gradual emotional erosion that does not look like destruction from the outside, but feels like disconnection from the inside. Life continues, yes. They still function, still speak, still laugh when expected. But something essential is no longer fully present. And that absence is where everything begins to shift. Because what they never fully admit is that they can feel it. That subtle distance from themselves, like they are participating in their life, instead of fully living it. On the surface, nothing seems broken. Work continues. Conversations happen. Responsibilities are handled. But underneath all of that, something is misaligned. A quiet sense that they are slightly outside their own experience. And this is the part nobody notices from the outside. It is not dramatic enough to be seen. It is not loud enough to be explained, but it is there. A slow drift away from emotional truth. A pattern of choosing what feels safer instead of what feels real. And if you listen closely, this is where the real shift begins. Because externally they still look the same. Still capable, still functioning, still presenting a version of life that appears stable. But internally, something more important starts to weaken. Not skill, not identity on the surface. Something deeper, presence. The feeling of actually being inside their own life instead of observing it from a slight distance. And once that connection begins to fade, everything starts to feel less sharp, less meaningful, less alive. And what they never say out loud is that they remember when that feeling was stronger, when emotions were clearer, when connection felt more direct and less filtered through hesitation or fear. And that memory does not disappear. It becomes a silent comparison to everything that comes after. And this is where your absence becomes part of something larger inside them. Because you were not just someone they knew, you were part of a version of them that felt more real, more open, more emotionally awake. Not perfect, not stable all the time, but honest in a way that cut through performance. And now that version feels harder to reach. Not erased, but distant. Like something they can sense but not fully return to. So they try to fill the space. They stay busy. They surround themselves with noise. They move from one distraction to another. People, conversations, routines, anything that keeps them from sitting too long in what feels missing. But none of it fully replaces what was there. It only delays recognition. And slowly, delay turns into pressure. Because living in constant emotional management is not neutral. It takes something from a person over time. At first it feels like control, like stability, like being fine. But gradually, it becomes something heavier. A kind of fatigue that does not come from the body alone, but from the effort of staying slightly disconnected from yourself for too long. Smiling when you are not fully present, answering when you are not fully there, moving through days that feel increasingly similar, increasingly distant. And yes, they feel it, even if they cannot explain it clearly. A quiet exhaustion that builds without permission. And beneath all of this, something remains untouched. A part of them that still remembers what clarity felt like. What it felt like to be fully seen without performing. To be emotionally honest without calculating every reaction. That part does not disappear. It becomes quieter under layers of avoidance and distraction, but it stays alive, and it waits. Not for you specifically, not for a return to the past, but for honesty. For the moment, pretending becomes more exhausting than truth. For the moment, silence becomes louder than distraction. And eventually, every distraction loses its strength. Every substitute loses its effect. And what remains is a question that keeps returning no matter how far they try to run from it. Who am I when I stop performing? Who I think I'm supposed to be?